Hey, I want to start today's deep dive with a bit of a crime scene analogy.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Right. So imagine you're a detective and you're trying to solve a cold case, but a really, really cold case.
Like centuries old.
Exactly. We are talking like 2,000 years old. Now, physical evidence is tricky at the point. Buildings crumble into dust, pottery breaks, even metal plates, hypothetically speaking, can just be taken away or lost entirely.
Yeah, the Earth reclaims almost everything.
It does. But there is one thing that people carry with them that is shockingly hard to hide and honestly almost impossible to fake.
You're talking about their words.
Yes. Language. It is the ultimate fossil record. It's subconscious, it's incredibly complex, and it evolves in these very specific patterns that most of us don't even realize we're using.
We just speak. We don't think about the math behind it.
Right. So today, for this deep dive, we are looking at a massive stack of research that claims to find a linguistic smoking gun, so to speak, for the Book of Mormon.
Which is a heavy claim.
It's a massive claim, but, and I really want to be clear with you listening here, we aren't just looking at the English translation on the page today. We are looking for the ghosts of an ancient language hidden deep inside the indigenous languages of the American Southwest.
It is such a huge topic. We are diving into the work of a linguist named Brian D. Stubbs. And just to set the stakes for everyone right up front, if Stubbs is right, he hasn't just found, a few parallel words here and there.
Right, not just coincidences.
Exactly. He claims to have found a systematic forensic link between the Uto-Aztecan language family and ancient Near Eastern dialects.
Okay, but before we get too deep into the weeds, I have to play the skeptic for a minute.
Please do.
Because ancient Hebrew in Arizona sounds like the kind of thing you see on late-night conspiracy TV, right? I mean, it sounds
Improbable.
very improbable.
And frankly, it should. I mean, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But what makes Stubbs' work so different is that he isn't some amateur just looking for shapes in the clouds. He's a highly credentialed, published linguist. And he's looking at the deep structure of the languages. We're talking syntax and actual mathematical sound shifts.
Okay, well, let's define our terms before we jump in. When you say Uto-Aztecan, what are we actually talking about? Is that just the Aztec?
No, it's much bigger than that. You should really think of Uto-Aztecan kind of like how we use Indo-European.
Oh, so it's a whole family.
It's a massive language family. Yeah. It covers about 30 distinct languages. It stretches from the Utes up in the Great Basin, so Utah, Nevada, Colorado area, down through the Hopi and the Pima in Arizona, and then all the way south to the Aztecs in central Mexico.
Wow. Okay. So the mission for this deep dive is to see if we can connect Jerusalem to this massive swath of the Americas using nothing but linguistics.
That's the...
And we basically have two main bodies of evidence to get through today. First, we have the text of the Book of Mormon itself specifically. The grammar that tends to drive English teachers crazy.
Yes, the awkwardness.
Yeah. And then second, the actual fossilized Hebrew and Egyptian hidden inside these modern Native American languages.
That is the roadmap. And I am really glad you mentioned the grammar first, because we absolutely should start with the book itself.
Right. Let's talk about the awkwardness. I think anyone who has ever read the Book of Mormon, even the most devout, faithful reader, has had that moment where they think, man, this is really wordy.
Oh, absolutely. It's famously repetitive.
It's full of these massive run-on sentences.
And it came to pass over and over and over again.
Exactly. And for a long time, the assumption, especially from critics of the text, was that this was just Joseph Smith trying to sound, biblical. Or maybe that he just wasn't a very polished writer.
I mean, he was a farm boy in the 19th century.
Right. But Stubbs argues in a paper called A Lengthier Treatment of Length that we actually have this entirely backward. He says the quote-unquote bad English is actually perfect Hebrew.
It's a really bold claim, but the data is just fascinating. Stubbs focuses heavily on this one specific grammatical structure called the Hall clause.
Hal clause. And that's spelled H-H-A-L.
H-A-L, yes. It's a term straight out of Semitic grammar. Let me give you a quick comparison so you can hear how it works.
Okay.
In modern English, if you want to set the scene for a story, you naturally use conjunctions. You say something like, after I went to the store, I cooked dinner. Or, because I was tired, I went to sleep.
Simple enough, cause and effect. After X, then Y.
Right. But in Hebrew, and actually quite often in Egyptian too, they don't use those connector words like after or because nearly as much as we do.
Okay, so what do they use?
They use a circumstantial clause.
Yeah.
It relies on a structure that, if you translate it literally into English, comes out as having gone to the store. or being tired.
Having gone, being tired. I mean, it sounds very passive, like a participle.
It is. It's tenseless. It basically just sets the stage for the main action. Now think about the very first page of the Book of Mormon. 1 Nephi, chapter 1, verse 1. Do you remember how it starts?
Oh, I can quote this one. I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, and having seen many afflictions, and having been highly favored. Yeah, it's just a giant stack of having.
Exactly. It's a massive stack. Now, in natural 19th century American conversation, if Joseph Smith were just making up a story, he would have naturally said, because I was born of good parents, and since I had seen a lot of hard times.
Because that's how people talk.
That's how English works.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that. He used this very clunky having been structure. Stubbs argues that this is a literal, almost robotic translation of a Semitic hal clause.
Okay, hold on. I definitely have to push back here.
Go for it.
What if Joseph Smith just talked like that? I mean, maybe he thought it sounded fancy and prophetic? Writers have quirks? How can we possibly know this isn't just Joseph Smith's style?
That is exactly the right question to ask. If you're doing real science, you need a control group.
Right.
So Stubbs actually went and analyzed Joseph Smith's other writings, specifically the Doctrine and Covenants and the history of the church.
Which he wrote around the same time.
Yes, dictated by the exact same man, often in the exact same years, sometimes literally in the exact same month.
Did he use the whole having been thing there too?
The difference is statistically massive. When Joseph is speaking as himself, or when he's dictating modern revelations in the D&C, he uses standard English connectors. He says after, he says because, he says since.
Wow.
But the second he switches into Book of Mormon translation mode, the frequency of these how clauses completely skyrockets.
So his linguistic fingerprint changes entirely depending on what he's working on.
Precisely. It strongly suggests that the quote-unquote awkwardness isn't a lack of skill or a personal quirk. It's fidelity to an underlying ancient text. He is translating a language that absolutely loves to stack clauses on top of each other.
Which is a hallmark of Hebrew rhetoric.
Exactly.
That really flips the whole narrative on its head. The very thing that makes the book kind of hard to read sometimes is actually the thing that authenticates it.
That is the argument. But, as compelling as that is, it's still internal evidence. And internal evidence can only take you so far.
Right. You could always just argue he was mimicking the Bible really, really well.
Even though the English Bible usually smooths those clauses out way more than the Book of Mormon does, yes, you could argue that. But the really mind-bending part of Stubbs's work, the part that you can't just explain away, is the external evidence.
Okay, and this is where we actually leave the text of the book and start looking at the real people.
Right. If the people described in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites, the Lamanites, the Molochites, if they actually existed and built civilizations in the Americas, they didn't just vanish into thin air.
They would have merged with local population.
They would have merged. They would have had children, and most importantly for our deep dive today, they would have spoken to each other.
And language leaves traces.
It leaves massive, undeniable traces. And this is exactly where we pivot to the Uto-Aztecan language family. Stubbs' central thesis is that Uto-Aztecan essentially acts like a Creole.
Unpack Creole for us, because honestly, I just think of Louisiana cooking. But linguistically, what does that actually mean?
Fair enough. Linguistically, a Creole is a new language that is born when two or more distinct languages collide and merge together.
Okay.
Think of Haitian Creole, for example. It's largely African grammatical structure, but with French vocabulary layered over the top of it. Stubbs argues that Uto-Aztecan is what he calls a tripartite mix.
Tripartite, meaning three parts.
Yes. He sees three distinct strands.
Yeah.
Number one, the original native language of the Americas. Number two, a really heavy dose of Hebrew. And number three, a significant influence of Egyptian.
Which, if you know the Book of Mormon narrative, sounds incredibly familiar.
It aligns perfectly with the text. Think about the Lehite group. We know from the first chapter that they spoke Hebrew, but they read and wrote using, quote, the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians.
So that naturally covers the Hebrew and the Egyptian parts.
Right. But there's a third group in the text that we usually forget about, the Molochites.
Oh, yeah. The Molochites are crucial here. They left Jerusalem around the exact same time as Lehi, right?
They did. But the text explicitly says they didn't bring any records with them. And when the Nephites finally found them centuries later, their language had become, quote-unquote, corrupted.
Right. They couldn't even understand each other at first.
Exactly. Now, Stubbs suggests the Molochites might have had a completely different linguistic flavor from the start, perhaps heavily influenced by Phoenician.
Phoenician.
Yeah, Phoenician was the dominant trade language of the Mediterranean coast right near Jerusalem at the time. And here's the crazy part. Stubbs claims you can actually tease these distinct strands apart in modern Uto-Aztecan languages today.
Okay, I'm going to stop you again. This is where I get really skeptical because there are thousands and thousands of words in any given language.
Sure.
If I look at Japanese, I can probably find a word that sounds like hamburger just by pure coincidence.
What?
If I look at the Aztec language, surely I can find a word that sounds like Hebrew. How do we know Stubbs isn't just cherry-picking words that happen to sound alike?
You are hitting on literally the #1 criticism in all of historical linguistics.
Yeah.
It's called random chance.
Okay.
Because if you take any two languages on Earth, you will easily find maybe a dozen words that sound similar and mean similar things entirely by accident. It happens all the time.
So what's the threshold then? When does the academic community say it stops being an accident?
Usually, linguists will accept a genetic relationship between languages if you can find between 50 and 200 solid cognates.
Cognates meaning related words.
Right. If you have 50 to 200, you have a solid case.
50 to 200. And what does Stubbs actually have?
He has published over 1,500.
1,500.
Over 1,500 incredibly solid similarities between Uto-Aztec and Near Eastern languages.
Okay. I mean, that is an avalanche compared to a snowball.
It really is. But numbers alone actually aren't enough to prove it. To truly prove a linguistic relationship, you need rules. You need what linguists call sound shifts.
Okay, this is the smoking gun part we talked about. I want to spend a minute here because this science is just fascinating. This isn't just word A sounds vaguely like word B, right? It's about how sounds physically mutate over time.
Exactly. Linguistics is surprisingly mathematical. The rule is, if a sound changes in one word, it must change in almost every word that shares that sound in that specific environment. It has to be predictable.
Give me an example.
Okay, if I tell you that the ancient Hebrew B sound consistently turns into a KW sound in Uto-Aztecan, your initial reaction is probably no way.
Yeah, that sounds totally unrelated. How do you get from a B, like in boy, to a KW, like in quick? They sound like they're coming from completely different parts of the mouth.
Let's do a little physical experiment right now. Say the letter B out loud. B, B, B.
B. B.
Pay attention to your mouth. What is it doing?
My lips are pressing together and then popping open.
Right, it's a labial sound.
Yeah.
Now imagine, over 1,000 years, speakers start rounding their lips more and more when they say it. They get a little lazy with the actual lip closure, but they emphasize the rounding. So ba slowly becomes bois.
Wow. Okay, yeah, I can do that.
And eventually, over more generations, the lip closure softens completely, and just the rounding action remains. Blah fully shifts to qua.
Qua. Qua. Wow, I can actually feel that transition happening on my mouth. It's just a slide.
That is the literal physics of human speech. So Stubbs took this rule and applied it. He didn't just go looking for words that sounded exactly the same. He systematically looked for Hebrew words starting with B and checked if the Uto-Aztecan equivalents started with KW.
And did the math hold up?
It is remarkably, undeniably consistent. Take the Hebrew word bashar. It means meat or flesh. In Uto-Aztecan, the word for cook or ripen, which is exactly what you do to meat, is quasi.
Bashar becomes quasi. The B turns into a KW.
Yes. Or take another Hebrew word, bashal, which means to boil. That also matches quasi.
Wow.
Or look at the Hebrew word barak. It means lightning. In the Numic branch of Uto-Aztecan, it becomes barak or parak.
Barak, parak, I mean, that one is incredibly close.
It is. Here's a really common foundational one. The Hebrew word for man or human is Adam.
Adam, like the first man in Genesis.
Right. In Uto-Aztecan, the word for man or person is atam. The D sound softens into a T, which is a very standard shift. But the overall skeleton of the word is identical. Adam, otam.
So we aren't just seeing a few random lucky hits. We are looking at a systematic, predictable reshaping of the vocabulary. It's not coincidence at all. It's evolution.
Exactly. And there's another major shift that's crucial to understand here, the Semitic R sound. In Uto-Aztecan, this R consistently flattens out into a Y or an I sound.
So the R basically just disappears into a vowel.
It turns into a glide, yeah. Look at the Hebrew word katep. It means shoulder. In Uto-Aztecan, the word is kutba.
Katak. Kutba. Yeah, I can hear that one clearly. Wait, where's the R in that one?
Sorry, let me give you a better example for the R shift. The Hebrew phrase ya'amin. It means he believes.
Okay.
In Uto-Aztecan, the word for believe is yamamin.
Yamin. Yamin. That is hauntingly similar. He believes.
It is. And this brings us to what might actually be the most specific, almost chilling piece of evidence in the whole study. It's a name, and not just any name.
You're talking about the Nephite connection, right? I read this in the notes before we started, and I literally had to stop reading for a second because it felt way too on the nose.
It does feel that way, but the linguistic derivation is incredibly solid. Stubbs lays it out step by step like this. If you take the root name, Nephi pronounced Nephi, and you make it a plural noun in ancient Hebrew so that it means the Nephites, it would be Nepiim or Nepima.
Nepima. Okay, I'm with you.
Now, look at the modern Uto-Aztecan languages, specifically in the Tepuman branch down in the southwest. There is a prominent tribe known today as the Pima.
The Pima people, right in Arizona?
Exactly. Stubbs argues that the name Pima and its closely related form, Navom, is the direct linguistic descendant of Nepima.
How does that happen?
There is a documented linguistic process called aphoresis. That's a fancy term for when the first unstressed syllable of a word just drops off over centuries of speaking. So Nepima slowly loses the ni sound at the front and just becomes Pima.
So if you were speaking to a Pima person today, their very name might literally be a 2,000-year-old echo of the word Nephite.
That is the direct implication, yes.
Yeah.
It heavily suggests the Pima might be the linguistic and perhaps even the genetic descendants of the people described in the book.
That is just wild. It takes the Book of Mormon from being this abstract theology and plants it right into real, tangible history. And there's one more specific word connection we really have to hit today. The Hopi word for God.
Ah, yes, Messiah.
Messiah. And Stubbs connects this to the word Messiah.
He absolutely does. In Hebrew, Messiah means the anointed one, the savior. In Hopi tradition, Messiah is the supreme deity, the ruler of the afterlife and the ultimate judge. And phonetically, if you apply the exact sound shifts we just talked about, they map perfectly onto each other.
It really changes how you look at these ancient cultures. It's not just about, finding an arrowhead in the dirt somewhere. It's finding the literal name of God embedded in the spoken language.
And it's not just vocabulary we're finding.
Yeah.
We talked about grammar at the very beginning, the awkward English translation. Well, Uto-Aztecan has fossilized grammar that still matches Hebrew today.
Fossilized, meaning it's just stuck there from the past?
Right. Think of the modern English word withstand. We don't really use the word with to mean against anymore in normal conversation.
Sure.
But 500 years ago, with actually meant against. It's totally stuck or fossilized in that one single word.
Got it. That makes perfect sense.
Well, Uto-Aztecan has fossilized Hebrew plurals. In Hebrew, a masculine plural word almost always ends in the suffix -im. But in Uto-Aztecan, plural words often end in ik, ima.
They kept the exact suffix.
We kept the suffix.
Yeah.
And they also kept the passive voice structure. In Hebrew, the nifl stem, which indicates something is happening to you, often starts with a ni sound. Well, Uto-Aztecan actively uses ne or na as a passive prefix.
How?
These are the fundamental nuts and bolts of language construction. You don't usually borrow deep grammar like that from another culture unless you were literally living with those people, marrying them, and merging your societies over generations.
Okay, so let's pause for a second and just look at the scoreboard here. We have this quote-unquote awkward English text in the Book of Mormon that turns out to match Hebrew syntax perfectly.
Yes.
We have over 1,500 cognates. We have systematic, predictable sound shifts like the B to gay W. We have incredibly specific names like Pima evolving from Nepima and Messiah from Messiah. And we have fossilized Hebrew grammar.
It is an absolute mountain of evidence.
So here's the million-dollar question. If all of this is true, why isn't this front page news everywhere? Why isn't Brian Stubbs on the cover of Time magazine? Why is he, as he puts it in his own writing, shouting into a void?
That is the most crucial context to understand here.
Yeah.
Stubbs actually wrote a whole paper titled Looking Over versus Overlooking, where he addresses this exact frustrating problem. It basically comes down to extreme academic specialization.
It's a silo problem in academia.
Exactly. To really peer review this data, to truly check his work and validate it, you need a very, very specific set of skills. You need a scholar who is a recognized expert in ancient Near Eastern languages, so Hebrew, Aramaic, Egyptian.
Right.
And you need that exact same person to also be an expert in Native American Uto-Aztecan linguistics.
And I'm guessing those two circles on the Venn diagram don't overlap much.
They practically don't exist. Stubbs himself estimates there are maybe 5 people in the entire world who work deeply on comparative Uto-Aztecan. And of those 5, how many do you think also happen to have an advanced degree in Semitic languages?
Just Brian Stubbs.
Just him. It's a sample size of 1. So when he presents this data to Semitic scholars, they look at it and say, well, I don't know anything about Aztec or Pima dialects, so I can't really comment.
And then the Native American specialists do the exact same thing in reverse.
Exactly. They say, I don't know ancient Hebrew, so I can't comment. The research just falls straight into the gap between disciplines.
It's quite literally a void in the research.
And let's be totally honest, it is a highly controversial topic. For a secular mainstream linguist, touching anything related to the Book of Mormon is often seen as absolute career poison. And conversely, for LDS scholars, for over 100 years, we didn't really look under the hood of the native languages either. We were too busy looking for stone walls and ruined temples in Central America. We weren't looking for ancient syntax in Arizona.
So Stubbs is kind of a lone wolf out here, but I want to make sure, he's not just some guy in his basement making this up, right?
Oh, it's far from it. He has been published in the International Journal of American Linguistics. He literally wrote the definitive reference book, the comparative vocabulary, for the entire Uto-Aztecan family. He is a deeply recognized authority in the secular linguistic field. He is just choosing to apply that secular expertise to a religious question.
And honestly, that's what makes this so incredibly compelling to me. It's using a hard scientific tool, linguistic forensics, to probe a spiritual text. And it brings us full circle right back to the awkward translation we started with today.
Right. The very things that make the Book of Mormon so difficult for us to read today, the repetitiveness, the endless having beens, might actually be the strongest scientific evidence of its authenticity.
It's like the text is constantly apologizing for being Hebrew, and we've just been complaining for 200 years that it's not English enough.
Precisely. And regarding the Uto-Aztecan connection, it fundamentally suggests that the Book of Mormon peoples didn't just vanish into the ether. They are still here. Their history is spoken out loud every single day in Arizona and Mexico.
They left their words. They left their name.
They left their very grammar.
So, as we wrap up, what's the ultimate takeaway here for you listening? Whether you fully believe the book is literal, historical fact or not, what does all this data actually tell us?
I think it tells us that historical reality is messy and incredibly complex. We so often expect proof to look like a neat little museum exhibit with a big neon sign saying, "Welcome to Zarahemla."
Right, we want the smoking gun to be a physical object.
But real human history is a creole. It's mixed. It's hidden in the subtle way a Pima speaker forms a plural noun, or the exact way the Book of Mormon uses a tenseless participle.
It's completely hidden in plain sight.
It really is. And it deeply validates the linguistic complexity of the text. It strongly suggests that Joseph Smith wasn't just riffing or making up a story on the fly. He was somehow navigating a complex linguistic web that he couldn't possibly have understood in his time.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've gone all the way from clunky hall clauses to physical coup shifts, from ancient Jerusalem straight to modern Arizona.
It's been quite a long journey today.
It really has. And here is the final thought I want to leave you with today. If language is truly a window to the past, as Stubbs says, and we are only just barely beginning to wipe the dust off that window, what else is out there?
That is the ultimate question.
Think about it. What other lost histories are being spoken out loud every single day by indigenous peoples, just floating in the air, waiting for someone with the right ears and the right training to finally hear them and decode the message?
The answers might literally be right in front of us.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you on the next one.